if we can experience limitless on the physical plane with our ability to measure, for me, a refusal to acknowledge that could occur in different ways that are not so easy to measure is the same as when people insisted that the world was flat or that the atom was the smallest particle. Just because you can't, I've heard scientists say if you can't measure it, then it isn't there. But what about when we couldn't measure stuff? We couldn't.
Well, I always love to respond to that and say, well, then here, let me.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, I always like to say, well, if you take that logic, then really you don't exist, right? Because we can't measure. I mean, we can measure the effects of consciousness, but we can't measure consciousness itself. And there are a profound number of things which cannot be measured. And my favorite example of which is qualia itself. Qualia is a word that describes our immediate sensory experiences. So scientifically, right, we can look and we can say, okay, this bowl of blueberries here, it has a certain chemical makeup, it has a certain weight, everything else, we can measure all that. The photons bouncing off of there hit my eyes, which send an electrical signal to the back of my brain, and my brain works a way to do that. And that's all great and good, but then at what point does that information translate into my experience of seeing it? And the palpable nature of it, right? You can't measure that. It's unmeasurable because it exists in consciousness itself. And so this philosophy of saying if you can't measure it, it does not exist, excludes the entirety of your conscious experience. You don't exist, dreams don't exist, and qualia don't exist, which means nothing exists.
It's almost as if, I feel like... sometimes I feel like science still bears a grievance from the early burning of its geniuses.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
It's clearly we need both these things. Clearly we need a relationship with what is known and what is measurable, but we need to honor the unknowable. Why do we have to become dogmatic and oppositional?
Well, I think, I heard, it was actually on the show you did with, I can't remember his name now. I want to say Sheldrake or something.
Yeah, Rupert Sheldrake.
Yeah. He mentioned that. He talked about how there was a political agenda behind science, right? Where the Enlightenment was trying to undermine the authority of the Catholic Church so that any compromise towards religiosity or towards even dualism was a step towards that kind of thinking. And because they were so actively trying to undermine the aristocracy of that world, they just couldn't allow themselves to entertain those ideas because it had a political, dimension to it as well.
And how can it still not? I would be curious to learn what percentage of scientific study is sponsored by or underwritten by capitalist endeavor.
Yeah.
And many people will say without capitalism you won't have the entrepreneurship or the desire to continue to proceed into new frontiers of discovery, but that doesn't seem true of human beings. And for me, that it appears that whilst science is the USP of science is a lack of bias, clarity, evidence, proof. There's continual demonstration of the corruption in even the way that what do I want to say? What's that word? Peer-led review is sort of biased and corrupt. That no one's exploring non-profitable medicines.
Yeah.
No one's all of it. Is there's a term Foucault uses of epistemes, eras of time, great epochs of time that are determined and defined by what is unknown at that time. And of course, it's unconscious, unknown, so it can only happen retrospectively. But for me, speculatively, it feels that we don't see how fundamentalist and influential our economic ideology is, that it infiltrates and dominates all fields of endeavor, that nothing is going to be discovered that is a challenge to the hierarchies.
Quo, yeah, it's 100%. It's like the saying goes, right? Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Thanks for watching this podcast and going all the way to the end of it. Would you so kind as to click the bell? It might not be there, over there, and subscribing so that we can infiltrate your serenity and peace of mind with jangling bells and buzzes. Thank you.